C.S. Lewis played an instrumental role in the development of The Lord of the Rings, and perhaps even a greater role than Tolkien himself would have liked to admit. As a member of the Inklings, Lewis would consistently listen to the earliest drafts of the trilogy and provide feedback that impacted the final result of the book. Beyond simple feedback, however, Lewis was a friend who encouraged Tolkien throughout those long years of development, who urged him to keep going and who assisted him creatively. What better example of this, after all, than their famous bet on who could write the best science fiction story, which ultimately led to Lewis's space trilogy and Tolkien's fall of Númenor. It is no surprise, therefore, that when The Lord of the Rings finally came out in July of 1954, the review of C.S. Lewis was perhaps one of the most important. The book is like lightning from a clear sky, he declared. It is heroic, gorgeous, and eloquent, but above all, it is romantic in a modern age severely lacking in romance. Though he compares it even to the Odyssey itself, Lewis notes that The Lord of the Rings is something new entirely. Though familiar and romantic, it denotes the conquest of new territory, the discovery of new waters. In his review, Jack goes on to commend Tolkien's world building and its incredible detail, from language and history to theology and culture. Such a book has, of course, its predestined readers, even now more numerous and more critical than is always realized. To them, a reviewer need say little, except that here are beauties which pierce like swords or burn like cold iron. Here is a book that will break your heart. They will know that this is good news, good beyond hope. To complete their happiness, one need only add that it promises to be gloriously long. This volume is only the first of 3, but it is too great a book to rule only its natural subjects. Something must be said to those without, to the unconverted. At the very least, possible misunderstandings may be got out of the way. To accomplish this task, Lewis makes sure to make abundantly clear that The Lord of the Rings is a myth in its true dimensions. The Hobbit which came before was but the beginning, a small fragment of Tolkien's imagination. Lewis describes the feelings that the book passes to the reader, the homeliness of the Shire, and that old rustic beauty of the countryside, while making it abundantly clear that Tolkien's writings were not some sort of allegory for the English countryside. Instead, it is inspired by it, and perhaps even made for it. A peaceful countryside whose inhabitants are suddenly forced into the world's greatest conflict. The part of the review that resonated with me, however, was how he described nostalgia within The Lord of the Rings. Not ours or the author's, but the nostalgia felt by our characters. For ages past, for their beloved homes and their previous lives. There is history everywhere you look, and alongside it, there are monuments, ruins now, that attest to the greatness of the past, a lost splendor that may yet be recaptured. He ends this first review by saying, "Even now I have left out almost everything, the sylvan leafiness, the passions, the high virtues, the remote horizons. Even if I had space, I could hardly convey them. And after all, the most obvious appeal of the book is perhaps also its deepest. There was sorrow then too, and gathering dark, but great valor and great deeds that were not wholly vain. Not wholly vain, it is the cool middle point between illusion and disillusionment." As you can tell, Lewis loved The Lord of the Rings. Although this is not something he experienced by Tolkien himself on his Chronicles of Narnia series, on which he was particularly harsh in his dislike, Lewis nonetheless made clear his support for The Lord of the Rings. After the Fellowship came out, however, there were some notable criticisms laid against it. These criticisms usually concentrated on one or two things, primarily a supposed lack of realism and the lack of any character moral complexity, rendering the book in simple black and white colors. Lewis, who had already written a very positive review for The Fellowship of the Ring, and who worked behind the scenes in the entire trilogy's creation, took the opportunity to reply to these criticisms with the release of the second volume, The Two Towers. There is, however, one piece of false criticism which had better be answered: the complaint that the characters are all either black or white. Since the climax of Volume 1 was mainly concerned with the struggle between good and evil in the mind of Boromir, it is not easy to see how anyone could have said this. I will hazard a guess. How shall a man judge what to do in such times? Asks someone in Volume 2. As he ever has judged, comes the reply. Good and ill have not changed, nor are they one thing among elves and dwarves, and another among men. This is the basis of the whole Tolkienian world. I think some readers, seeing and disliking demarcations of black and white, imagine they have seen a rigid demarcation between black and white people. Looking at the squares, they assume, in defiance of the facts, that all the pieces must be making bishops' moves, which confine them to one color. But even such readers will hardly brazen it out through the 2 last volumes. Motives, even in the right side, are mixed. Those who are now traitors usually began with comparatively innocent intentions. Heroic Rohan and Imperial Gondor are partly diseased. Even the wretched Smeagol, till quite late in the story, has good impulses, and by tragic paradox, what finally pushes him over the brink is an unpremeditated speech by the most selfless character of all. Jack makes note of the complexity that exists between the lines, by the struggles of our characters having to overcome evil natures, to sacrifice and to be better, something best encapsulated by the very journey that the Fellowship itself undertakes until its untimely dissolution. He highlights how vital it is to understand the true burden of the ring, the growing anguish it causes with every step taken towards doom, something that Tolkien manages to accomplish while simultaneously cutting away and showing how the gears of the free world are turning in preparation for the conflict with Mordor. This process itself has our characters make decisions that are decidedly not black or white. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and it is this point that Lewis wishes to drive home. Having discussed the matter of morality, Lewis begins his thoughts on something perhaps much closer to his own heart, the question of realism. Though I could just describe what he said, I think his perspective is so touching that it is best you hear it from him. This war has the very quality of the war my generation knew. It is all here, the endless, unintelligible movement, the sinister quiet of the front when everything is now ready, the flying civilians, the lively, vivid friendships, the background of something like despair, and the merry foreground, and such heaven-sent windfalls as a cache of choice tobacco salvaged from a ruin. The author has told us elsewhere that his taste for fairy tale was wakened into maturity by active service. That, no doubt, is why we can say of his war scenes, quoting Gimli the dwarf, "There is good rock here. This country has tough bones." He continues by emphasizing a point from his original review of the Fellowship. Every single species, every single creature in the book has a right to exist on its own, not just for the sake of the plot. Their cultures, histories, experiences, and mannerisms are so detailed and so lifelike that they should have existed even if they were all irrelevant to the story. In the end, Lewis states that The Lord of the Rings teaches us something. It is no allegory for any specific thing, as many of the time said, like nuclear power or the danger of the Soviets. It is not something current, but rather eternal. The Lord of the Rings, Lewis believes, teaches the reader that Sauron, meaning darkness and evil, is eternal and takes many forms. Countless wars have been waged against him, and every time it is the same darkness that we feel in our very souls. The darkness that we fear will encompass the world. Because of this feeling, we fight back, we persevere, light wins over darkness, and yet Tolkien teaches us that this may not be permanent. We must always be at the ready. It is this entire process of victory over evil, of life and death, that Tolkien veils with a heroic fairy tale of mythical proportions, in a way that truly touches the reader. Lewis finishes, "The book is too original and too opulent for any final judgment on a first reading, but we know at once that it has done things to us. We are not quite the same men, and though we must ration ourselves in our rereadings, I have little doubt that the book will soon take its place among the indispensables." A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.